this is our annual PSSA Keystone Orientation.
Assessment schedule. PSSA window, ELA Math, Science, 8th grade only, April 19th to May 7th. Keystone window, Algebra, Biology, and Literature, May 17th to May 28th. For PSSA specifically, the dates are ELA will be April 19th, 20th, and 21st. Math will be April 26th and 27th. Science will be May 3rd and May 4th. Keystone specific dates will be announced by the end of April.
The Code of Conduct for Test Takers and Online Tools Training and Tutorials. Each homeroom teacher should review the Code of Conduct for Test Takers with students in the homeroom at least 1 week prior to the opening of the window. So that would be by April 9th. Each teacher should review these items with their homeroom. Students will be asked to indicate that their test administrator has reviewed it with them on the day of testing. The Code of Conduct can be found in the Directions for Test Administration Manual as well as in the documents that accompany this training. The online tools training and tutorials should be reviewed by the homeroom teachers as well with students to familiarize them with the software and the tools. The Code of Conduct is probably not new to any of us, but the online tools training and tutorials might be a new piece to some of you. So once you receive your manual and you see how those items run, any questions can be directed to Mrs. Cesario or Mrs. White.
Students with special needs. Separate setting with no more than 12 students. They will be held in room 204 with Mrs. Barrick and room 206 with Mrs. Hayden.
Late arrivals and makeups. Any student who is late to school on a testing day should report directly to the guidance office upon signing in the main office. Mrs. Cesario and Mrs. White will then determine the most appropriate plan for taking the test, whether that be to jump into a test session depending on the time, or joining students in a separate room, or maybe making that test up during the makeup sessions. Mrs. Cesario and Mrs. White will also coordinate all of the makeups towards the end of the window.
Test security. It's important to keep all test materials secure at all times prior to, during, and after the assessment. The chain of custody must be signed each time the secure test materials change hands. So that means when you go into relieve a proctor, you will need to sign the chain of custody every time. Proctors should maintain a comfortable, quiet, and positive approach to the test environment. Proctors should actively monitor students during testing, separate desks, remove or cover content material on the walls of the classroom. So if you remember from your training, online training, there were several examples shown of active monitoring. Proctors should communicate exam information on the chalkboard, for example, ELA Section 1, Questions 1 to 27. Calculator and electronics policy. All electronics, including smartwatches, AirPods, etc., should be collected before testing begins and redistributed at the conclusion of the day's testing. Each room will be given an envelope for each student to deposit electronics. Each room will have a calculator for each student. If your room does not have an adequate supply of calculators, please request enough from the guidance office a few days prior to the start of testing.
Log-off issues and pause log. Excessive frequent logging off is a red flag to PDE and the DRC. This does not mean that log-offs won't happen. They will. It is very important to track who has been kicked off of the system, what time it happened, and what the error message said. Students may need to pause the test, for instance, if they need to use the restroom, see the nurse, if they feel ill or otherwise have an emergency. However, it is important that the student is not hitting the pause and restarting unnecessarily. Again, this raises a red flag with PDE and DRC. So it is important to indicate who has paused and what time they have paused. Again, this requires active monitoring to be sure that students are not doing this unnecessarily. Within your testing materials each day, you will be given a pause log and a log off sheet as well, so that you can keep track of these issues.
Supplies. Each room will be supplied with secure test tickets, envelopes to collect electronics, scratch paper, pencils with erasers, and calculators if you request them. Log off sheet, pause log, administration manual, seating chart, chain of command form. All items will be returned to the school assessment coordinator at the end of each testing session and returned to you on the next testing day. A seating chart must be completed for each testing room for each session. So every day you will receive a new seating chart for that day of testing.
Timing and response space. Each student is limited to a response space of 1,000 characters for each question on the online tests. When students finish with their test, they must click submit and follow the directions online for submitting it. Then close their laptop and sit quietly and or read for pleasure. They cannot do homework. Obviously, they can't talk or be on their computer for any other reason. And writing or drawing on their scratch paper is not permitted either. So essentially, they may sit quietly or read for pleasure. PSSAs and Keystones are untimed tests, but as the majority of the group finishes and the session is completed, students might need to report to a room designated for additional time. Now, with the PSSAs being held in homerooms and being all 8th grade and all 7th grade, for the majority of the test sessions, they will just stay in their homeroom. There might be some unusual circumstances where this doesn't apply, but for the PSSAs, there probably isn't going to be much need for a separate extended time room. For the Keystones, that is to be determined because they have mixed grade levels and multiple rooms used by different grade levels. So there will most likely be a designated extended time room for the Keystones. If a student does report to the extended time room, they must be accompanied by a proctor or test administrator who must carry the test ticket, as that is considered a secure material.
Concussion policy opt-out procedures. Medical documentation is needed within 2 weeks of the start of the testing window for students who are concussed for exclusion. Parents, guardians who wish to opt their students out of testing must make an appointment with the district assessment coordinator or the school assessment coordinator to review the test and sign a form indicating their desire to do so, although this will negatively impact our school's district's participation rating.
Upon the completion of the testing window, each proctor and test administrator must sign a test security certificate indicating the fidelity with which he or she conducted theirself during the test. This is not unfamiliar to most of you. You've done this in the past, and that form won't be provided to you until the end of the window. If you are aware of any testing violations, please bring this to the attention of the school assessment coordinators, Mrs. Cesario for PSSAs and Mrs. White for the Keystones, or the district assessment coordinator, who is Mr. Britton.
Thank you for taking the time to be trained on the PSSAs and Keystones.
Please complete the Google form that is embedded below this video to indicate your completion of this training, and refer to the orientation packet and materials that you received in your email.
This concludes the PSSA and Keystone testing online training. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions, please see Mrs. Cesario, Mrs. White, Mr. Long, or Mr. Britton.